On today's Rebel's Edge, markets are surging to all-time highs on the back of Trump's sweeping and historic victory last night. JP Morgan pops on hopes of less regulation, more liquidity, and warm waters for deal making for 2025 and beyond. And we're going to cover some of the trades that we talked about on this show, Cocktail Hour, and some of our services leading up to this election. When we get it right, we get it really right, and it's okay to do a quick little victory lap. We're going to do all that and more on today's historic Rebel's Edge.
Bang! Wow. What a night, Mark. I was actually getting some sleep. My buddy Mark, that guy, was trying to keep me up, saying, "Oh, aren't you watching the polls?" And I said, nope, I'm not. I like what I see so far. I'm going to bed. And then, since Puerto Rico is on Atlantic Standard Time, not Eastern during your observance of daylight savings, Mark, I am an hour ahead of you guys. So at 3 a.m, my time, my daughter calls me and says, "Guess who just won the election?" I was up from 3 a.m. all the way through till now, just going back and forth with our friend Grant Cardone, going back and forth with all of the folks like Bill Ackman and Vivek and Elena Cardone and all of our friends. So many of them were there at Mar-a-Lago, Mark, and they just kept, my phone was literally blowing up. And I turn it off at night, but my Apple Watch was what woke me up, because the Apple Watch was still on the Wi-Fi, and it all of a sudden said, "Hey, you got a bunch of calls." Oh, well, I didn't need to sleep as much as I needed this one, right?
I mean, it was must-watch television, John, right? I mean, as a hobbyist political watcher, somebody that's been in and around politics for a long time, we won't get into that. But it was really something to see, and it was trending in his direction from the first polls closing. He started with a big lead, kept a big lead all the way through to the end. It just was something that you had to watch. It was so historic. No matter what side of the aisle you're on or who you were rooting for, it was something really to watch. The American democratic process unfolding in this way. No significant problems, thank you, God, at the polls. No significant irregularities or election interference, protests, violence, none of that. Couple BS bomb scares that they think might have been coming from Russia or God knows where, but I think they knew they were BS, so really didn't interrupt anything. And that was what the market really wanted, John. There were huge bets on a Trump victory. We're going to cover them. We've been covering them as they were being put on the table. But what the market really wanted, and it got it, as evidenced by the VIX, which we're going to cover in a second, is ending the night with certainty. And my gosh, did this election result and the Trump campaign deliver with that certainty, both at the top of the ticket, the House, the Senate, and across the board. We woke up this morning to a brand new day, and a day that was not fraught with questions about what would happen next, but with certainty in terms of the result. That is good news, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Maybe the Dems don't feel that way right now, but everybody should be pretty happy that we got through this thing in one piece with clarity as to the victor.
Yeah, and by the way, folks, since I've got one of those hats too, those red and white hats, I use it to trigger people, Mark, because folks, Mark's hat actually says make volatility, the volatility great again. But from a distance, when I'm walking down the streets in blue cities, it tends to trigger people until they get close enough, and then they're sneering at me, and then they see, oh, volatility. What's that? I'm like, well, you're about to find out. And speaking of which, Mark, we talked about on this program 2 days ago, the 92,000 puts that were bought on the VIX Now, VIX, the VIX is a measure of the S&P 500. And is it a fear gauge? Some people call it that. Does it tell you market direction? Some people say it does. But one thing we know for sure is it's a barometer for certainty and or unknown. The higher the VIX is, the more uncertain people are. To quote our friend on Billions dollar bill, I am not uncertain, Mark.
I know you weren't uncertain yesterday. And yeah, look, I like to think of the VIX as what has emerged as probably the most effective sentiment indicator, right? You know, we're data guys, co-founders, investors in Battlefin. By the way, shout out, another big piece of news yesterday, got lost amongst the Trump things, but Battlefin completed yesterday a historic merger with Exabel Holdings and will be launching, as part of that merger, a full suite of data products and solutions, not just here's the data, figure it out, but this is my KPI, this is what I'm looking for, and here's what the answers are. It's a big, big deal. Our friends over at Jefferies increased their investment. I won't disclose the amount, but they increased their investment as well in conjunction, 7 figures plus, as well as in conjunction with this investment. So big kudos and shout out to Tim Harrington, Tom Bruderman, the deal team. We all worked super hard over the past couple months to get this thing done. Big things ahead for Battlefin, not the least of which, of course, we look forward to all the time, our January Miami big data conference, which we'll be talking about again. But yeah, this is the sentiment index, I think, that is the best indicator of market sentiment. And that was a massive, I'll call that 92,000. My God, what a huge trade. A 92,000 put trade, a certainty trade. That was a trade that somebody said, we're going to know how this ends. We're going to know it at some point in time on election night or into the morning. It's probably DJT, but either way, we're going to wake up on the 6th with certainty and not chaos. And that's what happened. So that trader, holy cow, what a profit was made there. The VIX, last I looked, John, it had a 15 handle. I don't know if it's gone even further through that floor, but holy cow is the VIX in
it was brilliant. It was brilliant. And by the way, folks, Mark is the co-founder of Battlefin. That's BATTLEFIN. And yes, he and I will be at that big Miami conference in January, and delighted to have our new partners from Europe as part of the Battlefin team, Mark.
That's right.
And again, Mr. Bruderman, Mr. Harrington, great job bringing it across the finish line, guys. Still exists. It's private. It's held just by the initial investors, but this is one that's going to be a big deal going forward. All right.
Let's get
Mark,
into it.
Let's talk for a sec about what's going on with some of those Trump trades. Let's talk macro minute with that. Well, we talked about DJT, of course, and we told you guys that DJT, which is, of course, Donald Trump's stock, and there are threats all the time now that Mr. Musk might be buying that. That doesn't mean I'm trying to push that narrative. I'm just saying that obviously this was a pretty good surrogate for how Mr. Trump was going to do in the election. Up double digits yesterday, up huge today, and giving a little bit of that back now, as you might expect. Some of these kinds of trades, like Bitcoin, Mark, we pounded the table for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin indeed through $74,000. I mean, we had so many of these kinds of trades, folks, that just were, Mark and I thought anyway, pretty easy to pick out if you followed the smart money, which is what we try to do. So what else did you have, Mark, that you were really focused on? I know you like Coinbase and Mara and MicroStrategy. What were you most bulled up about as soon as the Trump victory became apparent?
I think those currency bets, right? We talked an awful lot, John, about hedge funds. First, U.S. hedge funds, then global hedge funds started piling on next week. Bullish bets on the dollar, bearish bets on the yuan, the peso, and even the euro. Those bets paying off bigly this morning as well. And you don't get more macro than that, right? I mean, you're talking about global currencies and how they're reacting, because I think traders were expecting that Trump would or will deliver on some of those promises, whether it's tariffs, trying to improve overall trade conditions. The United States having the U.S. be a little bit less of the piggy bank for global peacekeeping and things of that nature. Those are all things that should, if implemented effectively, lead to a stronger dollar. Not to mention, of course, less regulation, a more pro-business environment, the departure of people like my buddy Gary Gensler and others, and maybe get some people in there that actually know the difference. And I'm sorry to use this one, but I got to. The difference between preferred stock and livestock, and that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, well, and Mark, on Fantastic Futures, I'm going to say this is the first administration that is pro-crypto.
Yeah.
So coming in January 20th or thereabouts, we're going to hear President Trump appointing somebody that knows about crypto, doesn't want to lose all the jobs overseas that people like the Winklevoss twins had to move their Gemini offshore. Many of these folks that had created great, strong businesses in the United States had to move offshore. Coinbase is one of the few that stayed, Mark, and that's one of your picks. But I mean, I think having a pro-crypto president, and even the president has talked about having a crypto strategic reserve. Why not? I think all of these are great ideas, and I think he's going to follow through on many of them. The crypto crowd in Nashville loved him, Mark, when he made those statements back in September, and they obviously were not fans of Ms. Harris because of her CBDC, or central bank digital currency, which is just basically a way for them to raid your wealth, the government that is, rather than not your wallet, then it's not your crypto.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, two quick points on that, John, then we'll get into the stocks. We have a lot to cover today. One, I'm going to be curious to see what role our friend Vivek has as it relates to shaping crypto policies. Obviously, very crypto savvy from the VC perspective. And what a terrific personality he has turned out to be. I don't know if you remember, John, but we were talking to him directly about a year ago about coming on our Bulls, Bears, and Blockchain podcast when we were doing that. And got to know Vivek a little bit. Always thought, what a really, really smart guy. They think this administration is going to benefit from his advice in any way, shape, or form that Trump brings him in. But I think, look, for as you point out, for as much as we are now positive and bullish as it relates to the trajectory of crypto under a more crypto-friendly Trump administration, the bullet we dodged with the CBDC, in my opinion, outweighs how exciting, and maybe crypto and Bitcoin gets to 100,000, 150, 250. That would all be wonderful. But folks, let me tell you, if we wound up with a CBDC, that on balance, John, far worse of an outcome as compared to even how fantastic of an outcome it is to have a pro-crypto administration. We'll see how that all plays out. And I hope he he enlists friends like Christian Gillibrand, Senator Loomis from Wyoming, both of which we met with a couple of years ago in Miami when they were working towards that crypto regulatory framework. That was the best attempt, in my opinion, to actually come up with something that was regulation through rules, not enforcement. Sorry, Gigi, that game's over in 2 months. And we'll see how that all plays out. So let's get into the stocks, John. I bet I know the first one you're going to want to talk about. It probably involves an electric vehicle and a very smart billionaire that was also having some celebratory champagne with our friend Grant at Mar-a-Lago last night.
Yeah, but before I do, Mark, before, I'm going to say November 19th, folks.
Yes.
The 17th and 18th, we have 10X Wealth in Aventura, Florida. And on the 19th, Mark, myself, Charlie Gasparino, Liz Clayman, my brother Pete, so many great traders are going to be there for just 100 people on the 19th. So Grant Cardone, it's his show, 10X Wealth, for those first 2 days, the 17th and 18th. And then we take the stage for an exclusive mastermind on the 19th. So make sure that if you want to learn a little bit about maybe how Mark and John trade crypto, how Mark and John set up our trades, and how we mitigate things like time decay and so forth, how do we get the leverage that we want without blowing ourselves up? Scan that code, that one right there. Scan that code and you can join us. All right, Mark, let's talk about Elon Musk. So Tesla stock zooming to the upside. And this guy took a huge risk. Many of you might say, how does the richest man in the world take a huge risk? Well, he goes against one candidate because there's one winner. Two people enter that arena. I know there were, independents and so forth, but it really was down to Ms. Harris and Mr. Trump. And if you pick the wrong side and you're the richest man in the world, you could find your wealth cut in half pretty darn quick. Oh, yeah. Well, instead, the stock rockets to a high on the day of 289.59. It's holding on to 287.30 right now. It is up $36, Mark. Bang.
Love that. I love that. I will say this, John. It's going to be very interesting to see how all of this plays out. And people have asked me, they've said, look, Trump's not exactly pro-EV. We hear you guys talking all the time about how how the alternative artificial intelligence power demand, data center power demand is going to suck all the remaining electricity out of the grid, make it even harder for the EV rollout. It's going to be really interesting to see how Elon and Tesla navigate what is essentially, in my opinion, going to be somewhat tricky territory, because the energy picture is exactly what it is. There's no denying it. We're not going to have enough energy because of these data centers. We saw news yesterday and the day before about some regulatory headwinds for Zuckerberg and Meta's nuclear ambitions in terms of ways to power their data centers. 3 Mile Island, Constellation Energy seems to be going forward, but also with some regulatory headwinds. So it's just a really interesting dynamic that the richest man in the country, or the richest men in the world, that has arguably the most successful EV company, was so vocally in support of a president whose platform is really, and I think for practical purposes, John, not terribly pro-EV. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the charging stations. We don't have the way to produce the energy necessary. Just practical and harsh realities. Doesn't mean I don't care about the environment. I'm just a realist, and so is Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, take a look at the unusual activity if you want realist, Mark. I'll tell you, realist is that the stock, when 20,000, that's 2 million shares, folks, of a $250 stock. So that is $500 million worth of stock. You just take 100 shares per option, times those 20,000, times where they can convert, and you say, oh my gosh, $500 million? Yeah. So if you want trades like that, come on over to marketrebellion.com. We got a lot of them.
Yeah,
all right, Mark.
What was the date of that one, John? That was 5-6 days ago?
That most recent one was, I think, Mark.
Yeah, the 24th
let's see, the 24th.
Look at that. Yeah.
Yep.
Jeez.
So big trades. Thanks, Jared. Big trades. All right. How about Coinbase, Mark? We also said, our other trades for Trump were Coinbase, Marathon Digital, or Mara, Riot Blockchain, Riot, MicroStrategy, MSTR. So many of the trades around Bitcoin, around digital assets. And how did this one do? Oh, it exploded to the upside as well, Mark.
How about Hood, John? We included Hood in that list. We talked about it a lot on Cocktail Hour just this past Friday. We talked about it briefly in the spooky election special. Let me go to the old Bloomberg terminal. Oh, yeah. Hood's up 18% today, $4.50. Pretty damn good trade, especially if you played the options on that one.
Yep, that works. And how about JP Morgan, Mark? And did we have unusual activity in JP Morgan? You bet your bippy, as they used to say on Laugh-In, Mark. There it is, 224 a share. It goes up 21.85 today, better than a 9.9% rally. It's through that right now. The right to buy it at that price, 230, when it trades all the way up through 243? Well, if you buy the at the monies, which is what Mark and Pete and I like to buy, that's a 225 call. And those calls, boom, to the upside. So make sure that you check out marketrebellion.com/get started. Right, Mark?
Yeah, 100%. Definitely go check out that link. And John, I think this is an important story. I teased it in the cold open. It is going to be, and we're going to see this in other names like JP Morgan, is my suggestion and prediction, not only today, but going forward through the end of the year for a couple of different reasons. Remember, and I pointed this out, I think, on Monday, we are coming up on some seasonal trading activity that can also have some significant both upside and downside pressure on certain names. This is going to be in the upside thing. That is portfolio window dressing, where managers, hedge fund managers, mutual fund managers want names that they think are going to perform in the following year or already performing in the last quarter of the year. They want them in that shareholder report. So they do a little window dressing to add them. You can see JP and some of the other investment banking names benefit from that. But I think that there's further room to go in this and other investment banking names. And why is that? Look, less regulatory restrictions on these types of deals, on the kind of banking, investment banking, deal making, IPO type activity that banks like JP Morgan participate in. That's going to increase liquidity. It's going to bring some of that risk capital off the sidelines, as it's already started to do today, which means 2025 and beyond, possibly through all 4 years of DJT's 47 term, is good, is bullish. We're going to see more IPOs. We're going to see more M&A activity. We're not going to see going privates. We're not going to see the offshoring of companies in the face of potential tax on unrealized gains and things of that nature. So all good news, and I think that party just started, to be very honest with you. We're going to see a lot more IPO activity next year thanks to this Trump victory, and that's good for investors. It's good for markets.
Well, Exact Sciences, this one, Mark, EXAS, some people crudely refer to it as turd in a box. These guys basically take a sample of a bowel movement, I'll use that term, Mark, and you send it in a box to them, and they can help determine whether or not it looks like you should go in for a more even exact colonoscopy, depending on what they find in that stool sample. Well, it had been a darling. Not today. It's down 25%. They smashed their guidance to a much lower level, Mark. And firms like Baird and BTIG, they adjusted their price targets downward. That's the first time I've seen that in a while for EXAS.
I think part of the problem that they're having, John, is that there's been several effective competitive solutions to getting the same result that don't involve putting your fecal matter in a FedEx and sending it somewhere, which I don't know about you, does not sound like a fun part of my day. So, as technologies improve and we get away from some archaic methods like that, you're going to see companies like Exact Sciences suffer. I think that's what's putting a lot of that pressure. I don't follow the name as closely, but my suspicion would be it's that competitive technologies out there that get the same thing done with less mess.
Well, how about this one, Mark? We've also got this particular First Solar cratering. And this is one that we talked about with green energy. And do Mark and John believe in green energy? Yes. Do we think it can replace nuclear, coal, natural gas? No. I think it augments them. I think Mark thinks the same, but it's not ready for prime time to run all our power. We wouldn't have nearly enough. Well, this one trades to the downside really hard, Mark. And when you look at it, a new 52-week low today. No, I'm sorry, not new 52-week low, but a new 6-month low. It trades down to 173. It has bounced almost $10 off of that, but it's still down over 10% on the day.
Yeah, and this should come as no surprise if you are a loyal member of the Rebel Nation, which I know you are if you're watching us every day. Then you're probably in our cocktail hour. You're probably in some of our other services. You probably watched our spooky election special on Halloween. We called this one out by name that if there was a Trump victory, this was going to be one of the renewable names that was going to get hit the hardest. And why is that? Lower interest rates, that's good for companies like this because they borrow tons and tons of money to deploy solar farms and things of that nature. So low interest rates are important for these solar names. So there's a benefit there. But clearly, the prognostication is that under a Trump administration, again, going back to sort of the story that we talked about before, that we don't have the ability to get enough of what we need from an energy perspective from traditional sources, that we are not going to see a lot of maybe support, maybe incentive programs, public-private partnerships and things like that will not get the same amount of love under a Trump administration. And that's one of the main reasons why this stock is going down. But don't say we didn't tell you, folks, because we did a whole bunch of times.
A whole bunch of times. Lastly, Mark, we are not going to cover sports today, but we're going to cover one more topic, which is super microcomputers. Because you brought us this one, Mark, when you said, did you read what Hindenburg said about these guys? And then we started seeing put activity, put after put after put, and just recently, more put activity. Yeah. So take a look at that, folks, on your screen. That is a screenshot of the January of 2026, way out there in the future. Somebody wanted puts. Now, that's probably somebody who's willing to hold on to the stock, but my gosh, they wanted some downside protection and they wanted it in a hurry. They got it. Stock dropped $5. And that one, Mark, just another example of these short sellers. Many of them, like Citron and like Hindenburg, really do their research. It's not just a dump and pump rather than a pump and dump. Those short sellers have really done their homework and believe and put their money where their mouth is, Mark.
There's no doubt that's why we do tend to pay attention to Hindenburg and Citron when they come out with some of this stuff. More often than not always, but more often than not, where there's smoke that they've indicated, there is fire. And when it comes to a company, and it's a little unusual, right? For a company of this size to have a tier one auditor, Ernst & Young, one of the oldest and arguably the best in the business, saying, it's not me, it's you, no mas, we're resigning. That's a terrible thing. It's even worse when the company says, well, we don't really know even when we're going to be in a position to restate those numbers as we onboard a new auditor. It's going to be very interesting to see how hard that is to do. Makes it really hard to onboard a new auditor when a firm as prominent as Ernst & Young says, thank you, but no thank you. And this all stems from alleged accounting irregularities, shipping chips to sensitive chips, right, from a national security perspective, to companies that are sanctioned or embargoed in violation of export controls. You see a lot of that language in agreements when it comes to these types of technologies that the manufacturer will not sell, and they list the companies and they explain the acts that protect that. And those things are there for a good purpose. I'm in favor of that. I expect to see continued support for those kind of restrictions and maybe enhancements of those kind of restrictions under Donald Trump from a national security perspective. But the sad thing is, which is why, at some point in time, I'm continuing to watch this one carefully every day, John. But at some point in time, you might want to consider, if we start to get, okay, we're going to announce the revised financials by this month, we're going to announce the new auditor, or we're announcing the new auditor, it might be time to look at maybe picking this thing back up again really cheap. Why is that? They generated sales for the quarter ending September 30 of about $6 billion. Now, while that was under the expectations that the street was looking for of about $6.4 billion, that represented, John, get this, a 181% increase on year over year. And let's not forget who their biggest customer is, and that's NVIDIA. So if they can get the book straightened out, we can figure out they got to restate some of the historical financials. Fine. That's the only way to deal with something like this, is to get ahead of it, address it face on, bring in a new auditing firm, issue the mea culpa, restate those earnings, and then this thing could be back in the good graces of traders. This is not, in my opinion, going to be one that turns out to be an Enron, right? I just don't see that here. So I might be, and I love to play, when it's got a legal aspect to it or an arbitrage aspect to it that comes from these kinds of things, it piques my interest. So we're going to keep you up to speed on Supermicro, folks. There's a lot more news coming as this story unfolds, and we will, as we always do, bring you more on the Rebel's Edge and our other shows as we have more information on that stock. So, John, we've reached that part of the show where we normally have Pete's Red Zone Sports. The only sporting event of any consequence last night was the presidential election, and I would say that was a pretty sweeping victory, both at the top of the ticket and down ballot for the Republicans. So we don't have Red Zone Sports for you today, folks. You're not going to have me on tomorrow. I got to be on a plane to Europe, and so I will not be doing the Rebel's Edge. I also won't be joining Pete, unfortunately. We'll be in different parts of Europe. But you will have John, the Dr. J. Nigerian, your co-host, your founder, your oracle of options and master of markets. And he'll be joined by the kid we call the prodigy, the black turtleneck wearing market roundup, Rebel Roundup editor and author, an absolutely brilliant kid, Justin Nugent. Do not forget to miss that, 1 o'clock Eastern time on this very channel.
All right, folks. We will see you tomorrow at 1. Mark, travel safe and bring me back some akavit. That's a hint on where he's going.
Done deal.
Thank you.